Okay. Alright. Starting a timer this time so I actually know how long I have. Okay. That is precipitously on the edge there, but it's fine. It should be rested. Anyway, hello everybody. This is Andrew here, and this is going to try to be a more or less basically unscripted, unprompted video. Basically talking about different things I wanted to talk about, more or less. I'm trying to use that word less. Interesting things, like I want to be more mindful. And more. There's the two issues with that statement. But anyway, it's besides the point. But I guess that fits into what I'm talking about. I'm just going to try to talk at length, but not too long. But just give myself a little room to, give my opinion, I guess, and voicing on, what... I don't want to make it about, my method. Ooh, what's my secret? Because honestly, I don't think I really have. I mean, I guess... It's probably best kept secret because my method for writing, be it music or be it my novels or just writing in general, prose, extend that from a prose poem. It could be a long kind of narrative form of something, but for the most part, I'd say the reason is because it's so scattered, and I get my sources basically on a daily basis. Almost it changes. Weirdly enough. I guess that's not so weird in this day and age of information age. So we have so much information at our disposal, and any of us can just switch on a podcast if we want to learn about something I don't know, fish, or if we want to learn about anything from the history of the Ottoman Empire, or just a really quick kind of crash course. We can. I've used those. I like those. I don't have anything against those. Means or kind of tools, but I think I try to take everything at face value, as much as that sounds like a cliche. And if I get too close to something, I want to say maybe a few years back, even probably recently, no more than a year ago, I was probably really into philosophy specifically because that's such a wide berth in and of itself, of just existentialism and thinkers Sartre or Nietzsche, or in most of the writing I like too is a lot of writers that existentialists claimed as their own, Kafka, Dostoevsky, these great kind of literary minds that were able to kind of imbue philosophy without really being, it's not it's Kafka really says in his works, hey, in the castle, he's not really saying something akin to, he's hinting at it, yes, but he's not saying any of the words ontology, or he doesn't say, being, or different things, but he's able to communicate those things, and that's why I love him so much, and he's definitely up there as a influence. But I also want to be able to kind of walk away from certain things. If something's too, let's say, I'm paying way too much attention, or it's becoming an itty fix of some sort. If it's becoming if I'm so entrenched and immersed in this author's writing, it could be anything. Nietzsche, for example, is he's up there, as far as such a great mind and intellect, and somebody who's so, it's Jung put it, I think, as somebody who's so acquainted, so well versed and in touch with his own, in the self, his self, he was so inner thinking and so much interiority, and so much, he was so super aware of not just himself and all that, but what was going on. There's another side of him too. There's a part of him where he would be to put it kind of really succinctly, or rather just kind of might be truncating it here, but he had, because it's impossible to adequately describe what Nietzsche was saying, but he was kind of in league with certain thinkers at the time, Wagner, or it was Louis Salome, or certain people that he was pretty close with, and actually was friends with these people, including notably Wagner, but had kind of a falling out, I believe, over his kind of walking into kind of headfirst into Christian nationalism kind of thing with I think Tristan, or I think it was Tristan, I think, and Isolde, we're very, you know, you have to make sure the German pronunciations, because it's actually Wiehard Wagner, I think, if you're going to be true to that. But anyway, yeah, I think he was just kind of wary of that kind of mentality of like, of being too, like, influenced or too inspired. I think it's not like wrong to be inspired by somebody. It's not like wrong to have the life, you know, feel like a new kind of like a new kind of gleaning of something, like a new insight is coming in, and to feel, you know, and this goes back to the old Greek kind of, you know, why the Greeks are so important. The Hellenistic period is, you know, because they have such wisdom, and one of those things was like the very kind of truism, I guess, is that the like the pathos, logos, and then kairos, and what was the, kairos meaning like the time and the place, and then the I'm not sure if Aristotle or Plato talked about these most, but it was pathos was you're being led by emotion, and like it's possible to get very led by emotion, and then there's logos, which is just like kind of the logic, and like I think it goes down to like the Greek word is like, you know, the Greek root is like word, the word, so you see that biblically too, like I am the word, like the logos, and so yeah, that's a big part. I'm trying not to be too led by certain things, and to be entirely taken by one thinker. I just want to be like clear that if I do say something about Nietzsche, it's not to say that I necessarily take everything he says completely and just like I don't want to be like an acolyte, you know, just like putting it at the feet and being like these person. And there are people that do that. There are people, I might be going a bit of a rant on things like the reaction to the day and age. This we live in this kind of new paradigm of like social, you know, everything is like so accessible, yes, but there's an inundation and like it's superfluity, like it's reached saturation point of how much we can take in at a time. Like it's like there's so much to take in, and there's so many like different opportunities, and like if we take, you know, it's, you have to choose that. That's why Kierkegaard shows up so much, because you have to choose like an angst kind of thing. You're left with angst, right? Because no matter what, you're going to have angst. If you look at things in a certain way, and you could start to look at things too much, you can get, you know, too kind of angsty, and you can get stuck in that trap of dread and like kind of, you know, that nausea that Sartre talked about, you know, like just being kind of always thinking about that and just never actually enjoying life. And not to say that enjoying life necessarily means like, oh yeah, just forget about these things. I think like Thomas Nagel talks about like a really nicely put thing about the mayfly. Like his take on the mayfly was that the mayfly doesn't, you know, like we might think of it as a lesser thing, like, oh yeah, the mayfly doesn't think about the, you know, the grand, you know, questions, like the big things, the, you know, the telling, you know, grandiose, lofty questions of existence, and like they don't think about these things. They don't live past a day, you know, like it's like the old, you know, kind of adage, like it's probably, honestly, I think it's closer to a week, I think, from what I looked up, but it's not even like that. It really matters. It's like, whatever it is, a day or a week, you know, when it comes down to it, like the ontology of the mayfly is drastically, you know, like its capacity, it's everything is so different from what we're talking, you know, like we're talking, trying to compare like the, you know, like what it's like to be a bat. Another thing Thomas Nagel talked about that hit the nail on the head was this instance of like reductivism, or like materialist reductivism, or that he saw like kind of imminent kind of in the sciences. Like a lot of people were taking up this idea that no, like these like consciousness is a material thing, or like you can't go beyond, you know, it's like, you know, everything is that you experience is gonna, you know, like subside one day, you will die, and then that is it. There's nothing, there's no spooky things like souls or anything like that in a Cartesian way. Like I think even Descartes too was like, I think more of a, you know, he thought of the self, you know, there was like the cogito sum, like I think therefore I am, and like that's how he got out of his little kind of thing, you know, is that kind of logic, and then which has become a bedrock of philosophy. I'm not, you know, trying to denigrate it, but you know, for the time. But then he was also talking about like this immaterial spirit too, of like, no, we are. There's the bodily kind of self, and then the immaterial spirit, which like subsists, I guess, and you don't know what happens to it. And then he's like, I think using kind of, I don't know if it was him that used this or like kind of different kind of rationalists of his time, but I think it was like something to do with like a tiny man, like a homunculus, I think was like, which actually comes from an alchemical tradition. Like homunculus was like, obviously the Latin root is like homo means man, just in the same way that it means like Homo erectus, like man, like homunculus, I guess nuclei, I think is nucleotide or like the nucleus of something. So it's like kind of whatever it is. It's like it translates to a tiny man. So you have this instance of I don't know. I guess this tendency to kind of circularly. I don't know if it's I want to call it circular reason, but it's like where does that where's our pure reason in a Kantian sentence? And it's like you can get into this debate all day, and it's like you can't really get to the downer. I think that's why Nietzsche was so great at what he did, because he was calling out other thinkers, like calling out someone like Kant for his kind of relying on, well, the reason everybody wants to actually treat each other in such a way as we could universalize this kind of principle is because we have it within our natural pure reason. And then I think Nietzsche kept going back, and he was like, well, where are these pure, he kept going back, where's the source? Like he said, there was some weird source point. I can't remember how he worded it, but I think that was I'm not sure if it was Beyond Good and Evil or I'm not sure. I think it was one of his earlier works. But anyway, so yeah, there's I think there's a give and take, I think, with any kind of way that you choose. I think if you choose one route in life, there's going to be an inevitable just kind of reassessment later on. In hindsight, you'll be thinking dang, what if I went this route instead of that? What if I instead of meeting this person, what if I didn't quit, working this stupid construction job that I thought was so dumb and beneath me at the time, and what if I just kept with that? And and I think I said this in the past, that I actually did work construction for a little while, up until 2-3 years ago. So yeah, it's what if I just kept going that? I could, what if I actually found a lot more secure, financial security, which is something I'm definitely not looking to do, because I'm looking more to be able to kind of build my own little nest, so to speak, to kind of branch out, but eventually branch out. I'm trying to get better at that, collaborative, and trying to reach out to other people and be like, hey, can I help? Can I get some help with this thing? Can I get some help with a novel that I'm working on or a song that I'm working on? But that's also a double-edged sword, because I found that to be really hard too, on one hand, but hard in my perception of it being hard is that I think it's I'm making it out to be harder than it is, because there's people that it's not that they have to be exactly on the same page. It's okay if they don't want to it's okay if they don't want to write a song that has 3 times as many chord changes as the regular song, or if they want to write a song that's in Lydian mode or in Phrygian mode or whatever. If they just want to write something that's just general on the piano, there's different. I'm fine with that, and I'm trying to get better at that, But at the same time, I also don't. I feel it's a catch-22 too, because if it's one side of me does want to do music, I think arts in general should be collaborative, and I think maybe that's more truer than, say, writing, because I feel writing is more solitary. But maybe not by much, but definitely I would say outsider-ish stuff. I found myself most identifying with people who are, Henry Darger or Daniel Johnston. These people that are not necessarily classically trained. They don't have, an orthodoxy view of things, but that allows them to imbue and make something beautiful and super meaningful to them in that moment, that they might not think will actually reach that many people, but actually ends up being meaningful to so much more, and it's so extensive. And so yeah, I like that idea of maybe not being so admired in your lifetime. It's okay not to have super success, like out of the wazoo, just complete an utter success, like people trying to catch you at your coattails and everybody applauding you. I mean, I think like there's a lot of loneliness, I think, stems from that, and I myself have certain definite struggles with loneliness, even today. It's not like those things, and I think like there's a part of me that when I was like in my teens or so, I thought there would just be something like, I'm not sure, like I never would have suspected I would get into like stuff like obscure, like outsider, avant-garde kind of Dadaistic art or anything like that. I mean, I grew up with it kind of in the periphery. I mean, I had, my sister plays violin and she's musical, but she's pretty much the only one out of all six of us, aside from me. But even I was like more of a late bloomer, like I wasn't playing music like super young. Like I had this idea of like, man, I think the first idea of like me wanting to, even singing, even just the act of singing or wanting to express myself with my voice, stuff like that was like something I didn't really feel comfortable with. No, well, it's something I thought about, considered, like when I was like maybe 14. Like I was like, oh well, I want to be able to kind of like sing, or I was like wondering like what that would be like, and I was like kind of joking around with it, and then basically it took me a while to actually get comfortable with something I didn't really get comfortable until like even today I struggle with it live, at least. But like as far as me singing, as with on my tracks or something like that, it's like something that I'm pretty more or less comfortable with, I think, at this point, of just expressing myself vocally and singing something like la da 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 da. Like it's not like you have to hit every single note perfectly. That's not what singing's about. There's control there. There are vocalists that have control, but those are like, a lot of those people are like professional too, like professional vocalists. Excuse me, just making sure. Professional vocalists who have a career ahead of them or behind them, years, and some people give to their craft. They're like decades of experience, and they're like, oh, they can sing like countertenor. They can be like. Like like way beyond that, like whistle register, like they can like and for me to sing that's like takes a lot of compression and struggle, and like less and more kind of like but there's also the thing of like singing not having to be this exact science precise thing. I don't think art should be like that. I think it should be open to like little ebbs and flows, and like being able to like appreciate the little like strokes of imprecision or imperfection, like not focusing too much on like executing it, just making it this thing that's like totally this, because I think that's where classical music divides so much with like just regular people art. Like even though classical music is kind of I grew up with it in my background and hearing it, like I remember discreetly hearing, like stuff like Sibelius's violin concerto, the one where it's like, what was it? It was like, I can't remember if it was like, it started out like a, I don't know what it was. It was like, what kind of mode it was using, or the vocals, but I do remember hearing that and hearing like the violin and how it was screeching and doing this and like all these rising falls and peaks and stuff, and liking it, but also at the same time being a little bit like not understanding it. But that like I don't think however old I was as a kid when I first heard that, really it's okay not to understand just to get what but I remember appreciating it, at least. So but then again, not everybody has that in their periphery, or even in their kind of general, not even like a friend of a friend. Sometimes, like depending on where you grow up, like you might be pushed into a different scene, or it might be more pop, or it might be this or that. But I do remember having an appreciation for stuff like that. And but then again, also my dad was like a big Beatles fan too, like, and he was like just interesting because he was like this hardcore Catholic guy who was like pro-life as can be, and like total like kind of on the right of issues. But he grew up in the or he was at least he's grew up, I think, 1955, so 57, sorry. And, he grew up in, this great world of, like, different, just kinds, progressive kind of led culture movement, like youth culture too. So, like, when he, there's a story my uncle told, about, him, like, meeting John Lennon on a boat, which I didn't know until, like, semi-recently, but I just thought it was really interesting, because, like, here's this guy that's, like, pretty religious, he's, like, has a lot of, like, religious conviction and faith, and, most of what he read didn't really extend beyond, like, Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, but, like, I do remember him, like, putting, like, little, quotes in there, or, like, little handwritten quotes on, like, his, of, like, different Catholic kind of, catechismic kind of things. But yeah, he was very, open to stuff. He was open to music, and, like, he made visual art, and he made, he, painted, and he sketched, and he did stuff like that, and he was just, like, I think that's just because it was a time when it wasn't out of this world to be kind of, like, to be, like, yeah, I do these things, but I'm also religious, It's like it wasn't such a dichotomy, It's not, like, such a black and white issue back then, which is weird, because you would think it's not. But then looking back on, like, just the kind of talk shows of, like, the time, like Dick Cavett, just off the top of my head, or Johnny Carson even, and just hearing how, and just letting people on to have a debate without it being glammed up, without it being like, no, we have to have talking points or something, like, we have to have all, like. And I know that talk shows are, everybody's and their mother has done this on YouTube of just basically, just laying it down, like, like, exactly what's wrong with them, and, like, how irrelevant they are. Excuse me a second. But I remember there are some talk shows that just did their best to hear both sides, I guess, and hear them both out, rather than having them, and being able to, like, let the audience do, like, being able to, like, not really censor things, and just be like, let this person's side talk, and then let this person talk, and then it's like, I think that's lost. I think, that kind of, I think people have been migrating to podcasts, which is fine, but then there's also, like, every podcast, everybody and their mother seems to be having, like, their little 15 kind of minutes of, like, they're like, I did this, and then I'm doing this, and I'm also a comedian, but I also want to do a podcast, or I'm also an entrepreneur, CEO of whatever, but I'm also a motivational guru on a podcast, and it's just like, I don't know, I think everybody's just hopping on that bandwagon, not because it's necessarily, like, a long-term thing, or it's like, and this is coming from somebody that, I listen to podcasts, I even like Joe Rogan, but it's not because of Joe Rogan that I listen to some of his podcasts, and even then it's been a while since I've listened to a full podcast of his, but, if he has something interesting on there, like Will McCaskill, like, he's a pretty, establishedly, like, kind of, I think it's in the arena of, like, rational, or it's altruism, it's rational altruism, that's what he advocates for, which is basically, if, judging from kind of Peter Singer, who I don't agree with everything on, who's this Australian, for those who don't know, he's an Australian philosopher, especially, really, namely, like, in the world of, like, ethics, like, what does it mean to actually be a good person, like, what do we do, and his, Peter, Singer, his idea is, give anything that you don't need, like, anything that's even just one bit of excessive, in utilitarian kind of, mode, I guess, then you have to give it away, because that is, like, that's something you could very easily give that to the betterment of somebody else that doesn't have those things, and it's like, well, think about the classic thing of starving African children. Why are there so many starving African children? Then you get into that kind of beehive of different things, and you're like, well, if everybody in the world, if everybody just, like, directed a little bit of their wealth, would there really be a big African problem? And then it goes into the more kind of systemic things, where it's like, it's not really starving Africans, it's more so it's not because Africans themselves, if you just, I'm not even saying this is what I believe necessarily, but it's not even if just Africans, if you just gave them an education, or you made them more like us in colonialism, and we're very imperialistic, and we have blood on our hands too of, like, the horrible things that I say we as kind of the Western, well, maybe not just Western, but like basically as the kind of European ideal of like getting the world, like basically tagging the world, which is a big problem, like from at least as far back as the Middle Ages, definitely like Renaissance onward, with like Christopher Columbus and raping and pillaging and all these indigenous species, or sorry, indigenous nations and tribes, and basically just taking advantage of these people and exploiting them for work and labor. And that's still a thing it exists, regardless of like I think class or anything now. It's like there's some, I think it's more or less this thing where it's like, why, if we just dumped all our money into something like Africa as an experiment, like if Elon Musk like just directed his, like just forgot about everything to do with like SpaceX and all this lame stuff with Cybertrucks and really just dumb kind of nerdy stuff that's like kind of pseudo nerdy stuff like that, is basically only for the kind of 1%, like him, like less than 1%. Then if he did that, like the question remains, like, would there be anything? Like if everybody billionaire did that, Jeff Bezos did that, instead of wearing a cowboy hat all macho and walking in and being like, hey, I'm the king of Amazon. It's like, rather than just flexing on people, rather than spending millions of dollars to shoot himself out in space, why not just, and this is kind of moral grandstanding in a way, it's like, I know it's like I don't know what they're thinking. Like if they did, because there is a thing with like Mark Zuckerberg and Chan Zuckerberg too, I think his wife, they did something like that for all the kind of weird just really weird stuff that Zuckerberg did with like the bunkers and like this weird fascination that tech billionaires and like stuff like that, they have with security and being like, ooh, I want to make sure that my assets and all this stuff are safe. This weird kind of paranoia that it looks like from the outside, at least, from somebody who barely makes $8,000 a year. And partially because I chose this life. I chose this disastrous, weird life that is fascinating to me. I'm fascinated by the world, and I just want to understand it too. But at the same time, like I wonder if it's not just about the money. It's not just like if people just did money, but it's like it has to be the people at heart. This comes back to like a little bit like maybe what Jordan Peterson says about like going down to the individual basis of like cleaning a room. Sounds silly, right? It's like, well, how's that going to help? Well, it could very well help in the sense of like, and I don't agree with everything he says, obviously. He's gone the right-leaning route of, like, the Daily Wire, and I'm more of, like, a centrist, but, like, it's a weird thing, because, like, I don't even know what my politics are. I'm just going to check to see if this is recording. Schultz-Nitzen in the gulags, or Viktor Frankl in the being sent to the concentration camps, or any people that have been suffered under horrible regimes. And like, interesting to think about how, in aside, that the the politics of like Stalin and Hitler were like polar opposites in a way, and they hated one another so much actually for it. I think, with obviously, Stalin being more like socialist kind of, but with the kind of idol worship kind of state of the deification of him being over everybody, just having complete control, autocracy, yeah. And then you have Hitler, which is more like fascism, which is like a love of the state, and it's like a love of Völkland, Deutsch, the Pan-Germanic people, and that the only good kind of desirables, I guess, are the Aryan race kind of things. So it fit along the lines of blonde hair, blue eyes, which wasn't really, because obviously Hitler was like brunette, right? He had brown hair. He had, I think, dark hair. I think hazel eyes or something. So it's like kind of weird that people have pointed out. But yeah, it's like this idea that if you they almost seem to be opposites in a sense, but like when it came down to the actual thing of like the accrual of power and like just seizing power, they both kind of turned out to be more or less the same kind of thing of like, with Germany, it was more or less that the Germans were treated like gods, and like you basically, if you lived in Germany, it was like a great land for everybody. It was like a great land of opportunities if you kind of kept your mouth shut and if you just kind of went along with the flow. And if you're like an Adolf Eichmann, of which Hannah Arendt had a lot to say, and you ended up actually kind of being more rewarded, or not, if you just kept your mouth shut and just kind of followed what it was. But then at the end of it, obviously, justice kind of found him out in the end, and he obviously got hung for it because of how, by the Israeli, I think it was like the actual Israeli, the state of Israel, he was like actually tried in. So yeah, which I think I actually reviewed on here. But yeah, there's a lot to do with a lot of, yeah. I just don't think, I think politics is ever changing, like I said, and it's impossible to get like the end, end all be all answer, like kind of even remotely resembling a final answer on any of this, because it's like, so it's like, like I'd say for the most part, like it's like almost artistically so, like if you look at like 90%, probably most of the people that I like artistically, they're probably going to be left-leaning, really progressive, just really just advocating for the common good of everybody, make sure everybody's happy and we can live along with a harmony and a collective that's not oligarchic, or it's not misogynistic, it's not, we don't have all that nasty kind of stuff. And it's like I agree with that, like I want to live happily with people. I want people in a world, in a perfect world, the borders would be open because people would get along with each other and it would be a great land of opportunity. That's not just this kind of like, yeah, like closing off the borders to Mexican stuff, but we live in a world that's far more complicated than that, where it's like, if you did open those things up, it would be like, not to say anything that all of Mexico is like the cartels, but you have issues like the cartels of just kind of systemic violence that's like bred into it. You're, like you're completely bred into you're being radicalized, right, by these drug smugglers, and you're pushed into that, and it's like before you know it, you're somehow able to kind of get to the point where you are actually beheading people, you're doing awful things, like thinking of new ways to kill people and stuff like that. So it's like awful. And I think that it's not just them, it's like, to any kind of insulated area you get, it's in some parts of the Middle East too, like of Saudi princes like selling off people, or violence being this idea of like a masculine thing, of way of showing off. And I think as long as you have political, like, it's just because you solve the politics of something, I don't think, is doesn't make ought, like just because you solve, like Hume said, it's like an ought can't make an is, like you're saying things like, all these things like are like, just because something is a certain way doesn't mean it ought to be that way, I think is one wording of it. But yeah, it's like, yeah. Because, yeah, like this whole kind of left-leaning ideology of like, let's just accept everybody, and it's like, and then you're like, everybody's nice and everything's like nice and stuff, and then it's like, if you go over to Afghanistan, then you end up being like killed or something, and it's like, I'm not trying to say there's anything like, I'm just trying to say there's like a weird stark realism of things that, and I'm not trying to make anybody lead it into hatred, I'm just trying to be like an understanding of the self and others, and I think like to have like a balanced kind of thing, like where the self like wants these things and the self like like the other part of us wants to do X, Y, and Z, and it's like we have to kind of balance those things out. Like the self prioritizes like object, or rather subjective things, and like there's a subject and object. There's always going to be a thing where it's like an offset, and if you are a really really like turbulent, emotionally volatile person, then you're going to have moments of slippery slope kind of way that you treat people, and it's going to be like, I'm going to be the best, you're going to be your best friend ever, and then it's like the next day you're your worst enemy, and it's like, and people tend to glamorize this too in social media and stuff, just kind of like, I could be your devil, or I could be your this, or it's glamorized with effed up relationships that are shown in Hollywood and entertainment, and you can go over Pop Culture Detective and see how that kind of plays out too, because he does a great job of like pointing out the hypocrisies and like the paradigm, or the hierarchies and stuff, like the hegemonic male kind of thing, the hegemonic masculinity of like every single Marvel character is like a hegemonic male that is idolized, that is this and that. And then it's like, and then he points out, but also different things like the Big Bang Theory, where it's like the Big Bang Theory kind of dwells in things where it's like, it's so painfully unfunny, just awful humor. But it dwells in this thing of like, haha, look how nerdy these people are. Look how unlike the actual perfect hot 6-pack 6'5" guy is. Like, look how, like, isn't that funny? It's like, yes, yeah, maybe the first time it's slightly funny, but after being repeated like a dead horse, and then having characters like Raj, the Indian guy, having him be catapulted into this world of just like complete like we hate these people. Like, you get the sense that they just like hate them, rather than just like, hey, it's just a descriptivist kind of, we're just showing this is what would happen because there are people maybe like these people. And it's like, I don't know, not really. I think people are more complicated than that. It's possible to be kind of a nerd, and then also to be like, you know what, maybe I'm gonna lift weights for something. I went through like weightlifting phases too. I ran a marathon, really crappy time of a marathon, over 5 hours. But like, just because you are born being like, for example, I'm a short guy. I'm not like super short. I'm like 5'7", but like like there's these things that we are given, these weird things where it's like, well, maybe if I'm a fan of Star Wars, which I'm not really at all, actually, but maybe if I'm a fan of these more nerdy things, or I like reading philosophy books, maybe my thing is to just kind of be this stereotypical kind of walking cliche, like hackneyed kind of thing, rather than actually just trying to figure yourself out, I guess, and figure out what masculinity is. That masculinity doesn't have to be this black and white thing. It can be, some people get into sports at a young age and they might end up being kind of jockish or whatever, and just kind of inculcated into that, and then they might go later on in life be more thoughtful, and more, maybe they convert to a religion, or they become a monk and they go to a monastery for 10 years and their whole idea of everything changes, or they meditate, or they do this, or I don't know, like there's so many different literal gradations of like masculinity, femininity, or it's not just in a way we need kind of dichotomies in order to at least vaguely ascertain like who we are. Check that. We need syzygies, I guess it's called. We need like archetypal, symbolic kind of attitude, like myth. We need myth. Yeah, we need myth of like something whittled down, to be able to just kind of like figure out like what, who we are, I think like we need to rely off of certain things, like things that I hate, like catchphrases, like, like little things like, I don't know, like just kind of like hackneyed catchphrases, like stuff that you hear on like a kind of like Nike, for example, just stupid, kind of easily replicatable, pithy sayings. We need those in one sense, just because everything's so dang complex all the time that we have to like cling to these simplifications but also with the knowledge of it being more complicated. We can't just blithely do it, I don't think. Then again, I'm saying can't. I'm saying is ought, right? So don't take everything I say, because who am I, right? But anyway, it's a humble brag there, I guess, for what it's worth. But yeah, there's a thing. I'm just trying to figure things out. I'm just trying to figure out what. That's why writing is more, I think, conducive for me, at least. But like, it feels also like writing is a weird thing, right? Like, it's like, it makes no sense evolutionary if you look at it, things like that, like a Darwinian type of thing, for somebody to spend hours